Hello folks, this is week 6 of CIS 1440. This week we'll cover the document object model scripting with JavaScript. This covers Murrock chapter 6 with also some other reference material in Ducat chapter 5. So I've had a few people ask me some questions about if I download certain files from D2L, how can I make use of those zip files. So the example I'm giving you here is inside of my CIS 1440 folder in Workdir. I've downloaded the chapter 6 bookapps.zip folder, and that is available under week 6 on D2L under content. I'm going to unzip this, extract it by right clicking, go to extract files, and just say OK. You might have a slightly different interface. The default Windows 7 interface might say, extract to or something like that. So I can delete the zip file as soon as I've unzipped this folder here. And then over here in Aptana, you'll see that I've created a new project, web project called Chapter 6. To import, we can see under Chapter 6 Book Apps Chapter 6, you've got all these different folders which each have possibly subfolders with images and the HTML files and such inside of them, and JavaScript files, etc. These are all the book applications that we go through in this chapter, available through there. So in order to import those files, or at least the subfolders with the files inside of them, into this Chapter 6 project we've just created, I can right click here, go to import, and then the option you will select is general, and then you can pick file system. This will import resources from the local file system into an existing project, so it will copy the folder structure and files. So I click next. I say copy from directory. I have to browse to tell it where to find it, and I know that I've saved my stuff into 1440 Workdir. And you've got these book apps here. I'm going to expand that. And then you've got the Chapter 6 inside of here, which contains all the subfolders. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually select the Chapter 6, because that will actually import all of these subfolders here. I hit OK and check it, and then hit Finish. You'll now notice that I now have FAQs1, FAQs2, FAQ links, and each of these has all the subfiles, etc. inside of them. So there's brief mention about how to do that, so that should be fairly clear, fairly straightforward. You can actually, you'll actually note that once you do that, Chapter 6 will actually have a copy of all that stuff in it. So you could delete the Chapter 6 folder that we extracted from the zip file at that point. We have all the files copied. So, unless you want to keep it for backup in case you jack these up, you won't have to download it again. So, Chapter 6, we will talk about scripting with DOM in, or the document object model with JavaScript. Okay, so here's what the code for a web page looks like. We've seen this many times before. So you've got the basic, this is an HTML5 website. So we're trying to discover, well, what exactly is the DOM? Okay, so what is the DOM? The document object model, or DOM, is built as an HTML page is loaded into the browser. It isn't a part of HTML, and it isn't a part of JavaScript, it isn't a part of CSS, but any browser that's going to do anything useful has to create in memory. Okay, we've made brief mention of memory concepts, and if you've had other classes, you probably have talked about it. But the active memory, the stuff that's in memory while your computer is on, or being potentially operated on while the computer's on, as opposed to on the long-term storage devices like flash drives and hard disks, those are secondary storage, but primary memory, or main memory, is called RAM, random access memory. And when you have certain things in memory, those are loaded into variables and constants and all kinds of things like that, and also instructions can be loaded into memory as well. So a lot of this is taken care of by the JavaScript engine for us, and also the HTML browser, or browser that supports HTML, will actually create a model of what this HTML file actually means. It'll create various nodes to represent the HTML. At the very top you have document, actually. They don't show it, I don't think, on here, but you have document, and then HTML is under that. And then in HTML contains an element node called head and one called body. And then body contains h1, as you see here. Body contains an h1, a form, and there that's reflected here. Body has an h1 and a form. And then form has a label, and input, and a span. So you can see form has inside of it label, input, and span. So this is the document object model for the previous web page. So anytime an HTML page is loaded, the browser has to actually create this model. The DOM nodes that you will commonly use are document, element, attribute, and text. Okay, so there's different types of nodes here. These are text nodes, and then these right here that we talked about are element nodes. So there are also attribute nodes, and there is the document node, which is at the very top. Some of the properties of the node interface are node value, parent node, child nodes, first child, last child, and next element sibling. Okay, so be aware of that. HTML that contains elements and text nodes. For example, you've got these different elements right here, such as form and h1, etc. The text inside of h1 is please join our email list, so that would be a text node inside of this h1 element. The text node cannot have any descendants itself, but other nodes such as body and form can. They actually can have nodes inside of them. And then each of these nodes might have an attribute node that is actually considered part of the element node, because the attributes apply to the different elements. So how do we get the text of an HTML element? Well, we've seen it before, but this might be a little bit more clear now that we're talking about the document object model. You say, assuming $ is defined such that it calls getElementById, you have email error here, and then so we're looking for something with the ID email error. So we saw it right here. The span has the ID email error. First child, the first child of this span would be the text node right here that currently has an asterisk in it. And then you have node value, which is the value that is returned and stored in this error text variable. What about setting the text of an HTML element? Well, you can do the same thing. You get the element by ID, set the first child, which is the text node's node value to entry is invalid. What about setting the text for a span tag to an empty string without using its ID? Well, the span tag, if we look at our code again, the span tag is right next to email address, or it's actually right, it's under in the HTML, but if you think about it, they're actually siblings because they all have the same parent, which is form ID. So this form ID has label input span label input, right? It has all these children here. So these are all siblings. So you would say that the sibling right after email address, or the next sibling, is the span. That's the email error. So that's how you would access it. You would say, if I've got email address, which is our span, next element sibling, first child, that's the text that belongs inside of our next element sibling. Well, who is that? That is the span right here. Since email addresses are input, I think I misspoke. The email address is the input, next element sibling is the span, and then first child is the text element, or text node, and then the node value you're setting to empty. Here are some methods that are available in the document and element interfaces. These are both interfaces. They all return arrays. Okay, these three up here. You've got get elements by tag name. So you could pass, for example, the A tag name, and then that will return all the anchor references, so anything that's got a link. You could pass img for image, h1 for all the h1 headings, etc. That will return an array of all those elements. Okay, all the different nodes in the document object model. Get elements by name, that'll pick it up by their name, and then get elements by class name, anything with a particular class name, say class equals blue or some other maybe CSS class you're using. It will allow you to find those and it'll return an array. So the methods of the element interface, other ones that aren't shared between document and element, you've got has attribute, which returns true if the element has the attribute specified in the name. So if it has an attribute, say class or ID or something like that, it will return true. Get actually returns the value of the attribute that you specified. So if you say get attribute class and the class's name is blue, it'll return blue. It'll return an empty string if the attribute name isn't set. Okay, we'll assume that it has it but isn't set, so it'll return empty string. Set attribute takes two parameters. You've got the name and then the value. So if you have a particular attribute that you're trying to set, you can call set attribute on it and then set its value and then remove. Similarly, you can remove the attribute from the document object model, and through all of these you can use these to affect the way that the page is displayed. So how do we create an array of elements? So here's an example. Var links, so it's a variable here named links, equals document.getElements by tag name, and then you pass a into it. That will give you an array of all the anchor tags. Now how do we create an array of all list item tags within a particular UL element? So this one is a containing example. This is a little bit different. You're not saying document.getElements by tag name, because that would look at the top level of the HTML. Here we're saying document.getElement by ID, so we are using it here, but you say image list, and you're naming that variable list that contains that particular element. So once you find the list named image list, you then say I'm taking that list and then get elements by tag name, all the list items in that list. So there could be other list items throughout the document in other lists, but this one will only find the ones that are in this image list. How do we test for and get an attribute? So let's say we have list, and then we say it's equals to image list. List.has attribute will test to see, does this have a class set? If that is true, then we set class attribute equal to list .get attribute class. Okay, and then you could do something with it. How do you set an attribute? Well, you get the element by ID, for example, such as a particular div, and then you say image.setAttribute class to open. How to remove an attribute? Well, same thing. You call a remove attribute. So let's say we want to remove the class entirely so it doesn't have a class associated with it. So the terms you should be familiar with are document object model and DOM core specification and interface. This example is the FAQs application in browser. So we can look at some of the HTML. You've got the section right here, and then you've got an H1, H2 named plus. Okay, then you've got div class that's closed. Okay, so by default it's closed. You might think, well, how's that affected? If we go to the CSS, you see closed has display set to none. That will cause whatever's in that particular div to not be displayed. When it is set dynamically to open, it will display it in a block. So it will not be invisible, it will be displayed as a block. Keep also in mind the plus and minus signs. You have a URL in those backgrounds. They're set to no repeat. They're set to go horizontally to the left and then vertically centered. So if we go back to our code here, we have a close here. So by default, the what is jQuery is closed. Okay, so it has a plus symbol by default. Okay, and then the other stuff inside of it is closed. There's nothing under it right away. Why is jQuery so popular? That is closed by default. And then you got 3 reasons. And then some more code down here, which is harder to learn, jQuery or JavaScript. This is also closed by default. So by default, you actually just see the plus symbols. They're showing the example being used with our little plus symbol here. This is an image that's loaded from file. So if I look in our example here, I have plus and minus. These are just very, very small symbols. I can zoom in to show you that there's a minus symbol here. But there's a plus and a minus right there, and then you have the FAQs JavaScript, index, and then main. If I look in Aptana Studio to show you what it looks like in Fox 1, you have minus and plus in the images directory, and then you have the index.html that we were just looking at pretty much on the slide. Notice that it is using the shiv for older browsers that don't quite understand HTML5, and then you've got script source equals facts.js, and you've got the style sheet main.css. So if I open up main.css, this has some section stuff done to it, but some of the ones we want to focus in on are the plus and minus. So we know that we've got our plus symbol and our minus symbol all the way to the left, no repeat, so it doesn't go pluses all the way across or minuses. And then you've got left, so that means it's all the way to the left. And then they're centered vertically. If I look at the JavaScript, one thing I've noticed about their JavaScript in this book is that it, although the browsers will interpret it properly, you could actually get rid of all these errors either by going through Aptana and telling it not to do JavaScript validation, which is one way, or just put a semicolon at the end of the appropriate functions. Any end of a function should have a semicolon actually at the end. So I think that's it. Yep. So we put a semicolon there, there, and there. So I'm not sure exactly why they do that. That may be a pattern that some people use right now, but if I were you, I would put the semicolon. It definitely doesn't hurt, and even Aptana is complaining about it, and probably wouldn't fully validate. So I'm not sure why they insist on not using the semicolons. I'll email my publisher and find out. So there's probably a good reason. It may be the new way everyone wants to do it, and Aptana hasn't picked up on it yet. But I would say technically, since this is an anonymous function, it's not. It doesn't say function. If it said function, something. If it had an identifier and it was a non-anonymous or a named function, then you would not need the semicolon at the end. But since it's an anonymous function, it is a function inside of a statement because we're setting a value of some other item, so it should have a semicolon at the end. So just because a browser interprets it properly does not mean your code's right. So anyway, I put all the semicolons here. You've got a for loop here, which you should note ends here, so that's the end for loop. We've got this for loop right here that loops through. It sets H2 node to the particular element at the particular place. You might think, well, what element is that? Well, this is getting all the H2 elements. Okay, so all the H2 elements are those items that we saw that have the plus and minus next to them. So one way to do this is you test to see if the get attribute of the class is equal to plus if they click on the particular node, and that will actually cause it to change the attribute of class to minus. Otherwise, set the attribute to plus. Okay, so if it's already minus, it'll set to plus. If it's already plus, it'll set it to minus. And we know by the plus and the minus that can that determines what image is shown there. Now you have the next element sibling. If we look here, next to the plus here, the next element sibling is that div that's right next to each of these. So that's why it has to loop through. It knows that the next element sibling for each of these just happens to be the div for the closed div it starts off with. So you just test if it's closed at first, then you set it to open. Otherwise, you set it to closed. So that's one way to do it. If we run this, in fact, run as JavaScript web application, we run this, and you should be able to see I can click any of these, and it will in fact change this right here. This is the H2 image. It'll also change the div that's right next to it. So when I click it, it sets the div that's right underneath. This is the H2 actually, with the left image, but right underneath is a div. When you click on the minus sign, it actually restores it sets the class to closed. When you click it, it sets the class to open. So that's why you can see it or not. Now, how does that work? Well, you're telling the CSS by saying it's closed, setting it to closed, you're setting the display of the div to none. So that means it will not show. So right here, right? So it's set to none, and then it's set to block. None, then block. So this is actually pretty clever, and it looks really, really cool. So it's very, very useful. All right, so that's good. In case you're wondering why I sound funny, I do have a cold, so I apologize if I sound like I'm stuck inside of a fishbowl or something. Okay, so they give you the HTML and the CSS for the FAQs application. We already talked about that. So there's another version of the FAQs application. This would be the FAQs 2 that they show. So we'll open up index.html. This time, you'll notice they just have the H2 element. They didn't really set a class name or anything. And then the divs, they didn't set a class name there, so you might think, well, how are they actually making this work? Well, they did some clever things. They just have the default, instead of having a separate class, which is indicated by the dot here in CSS, they just assume that the closed is the default. So display set to none, and then open is a special class. So by default, these don't have any class. A class is associated with them. So what do we do here? Instead of using get attribute and then testing if it's plus or minus, we'll remove some of this these errors so this looks a little bit nicer. Okay, and this guy. Okay, so instead of testing get attribute and seeing if the class is equal to plus or minus, they just say, does it have an attribute? Now we know the default is no, it doesn't. So if it doesn't, then you if it doesn't have the attribute, then you just set the attribute to minus. So you actually give it an attribute called class, and then set that value of that class to minus. And then if it does have the class, we know we've clicked it again, then it's going to actually close it. So it'll remove the attribute. That's all it does. So it just removes the special formatting from the class, because default will affect any div inside of here. So this is another way to do it, and this is actually more compact. And it does the same thing with the close and open here. So we don't actually have a closed class anymore for the divs. I'm sorry, earlier I was talking about the H2. You set the minus or the plus. But for the divs, you have the closed, which is the default. None is the display. And then block is what is set if it's open. So it's pretty straightforward. So let's see what that looks like. There's JavaScript web application, and as you can see, it does exactly the same thing. It's just a different way to code it. Okay, and arguably it's a better way to code it because it's more compact. We don't need to distinguish between two different classes if the default div in here should have, it shouldn't be showing. Okay, so we know that the default is display is none. Okay. Alright, so that's the alternative way to display that. Some things that you should keep in mind are accessibility and usability. So usability, refers to how easy it is for someone to use a website. In general, we're assuming that these people are people who have don't necessarily have any disability, so that accessibility refers to the qualities that make the website accessible to users with some sort of disability, such as seeing disabilities or motor control disabilities and things like that. But in general, usability is just talking about how easy is it to find your way around the website to find what you're looking for as quickly as you can. So navigations are underlined text is always a link. So if you have underlined text all over the place and none of them are links, that's probably a bad thing. A small symbol in front of a text phrase is clickable, such as our example with the plus and the minus. It just looks like it should be clickable. It should kind of mimic the idea of a button. Images that are close to short text phrases are clickable. Buttons should look like buttons and should always be clickable. So don't make it something stupid that blends in with the background or something. That's usually not a good idea. How the FAQs usability can be improved. Well, we could highlight the heading when it has the focus or when the mouse hovers over it. That's one way we could do it. What about accessibility? Two major categories of things you should worry about when you're dealing with accessibility are for the visually impaired. That's one group of people. So all the essential information should be presented in text that's easy to read, because some users may not be able to read the text that's in images. So you don't have to make everything huge, but there are actually people who don't have any sight or very, very little sight. They have often software and hardware that are text readers, and they can read through the document and tell them where certain things are and such. So that would be better. If you have all of your information in images, they may not be able to access that. So that would be an accessibility problem. For the motor impaired, these would be people that, for example, have impairments, missing limbs, or maybe their limbs don't work properly, things like that, or can't move properly, or the motor impaired. All of the essential content and features should be accessible with the keyboard, because some users may not be able to use a mouse. Okay, so mouse sometimes takes really fine motor skills and things like that. So you need to be at least aware of problems that people could experience. So how does the FAQs application fit into this, the one we were just showing? Well, we could make the headings link so the user can use the tab key to move from one to the next. Move the cursor to the first heading when the page is loaded, so we set the focus on that. Highlight the heading when it has the focus or the mouse is hovered over it, or let the user activate the click event of the heading by pressing the enter key when the heading has the focus. So this would be the example. So this is the one that improves accessibility. So they're showing the example with improved accessibility. I think it's FAQs links. Let's close these and try this. I think this is it. Yeah. Okay. So you've got your JavaScript web application, and you'll notice that when I hover over any of these, it shows me what I'm hovering over. I can also hit the tab key, and it will actually let me do Shift Tab and Tab to move between each of these. And anytime I hit Enter, I'm just hitting Enter right now. I'm not using my mouse. Okay, so I'll move the mouse down here so you know I'm not cheating. I can hit Enter here on any of these, do Shift Tab to go up, and it does the same thing that we would expect from a mouse. So this is really, really useful. Okay, it's more usable because it's telling me exactly what I'm hovering over each time, or what is active at least, and then it's also more accessible because we're allowing the user to navigate here without actually using the mouse. So that's one thing to consider. So you have to always be aware of your clientele who might be visiting your website. So you can look at the JavaScript for this improved accessibility. They get the FAQs page, get the element by ID, the H2s. They go through and they attach the event handler. Okay, so same code as before. And then move the focus to the first link. That's so they can start tabbing through them easily. So you take first link, that's the name of the very first one. If we look at the HTML, that's what we have here. First link, that's the top one. The other ones don't have that ID. Don't need them, because the only reason we do that is so we can set the focus to the first link. Common default actions for click events. This is our next set of topics, or topics. You've got these common default actions. You've got A, which for that tag, the default action for clicking will load the page or go to a placeholder. And then you have input. You can either submit or reset a form. Same thing with buttons. You expect there to be a submission of a form or a reset of a form. So how do we cancel the default action? So in DOM compliant code, which would include things like Firefox, Safari, Opera, and Chrome, you have function, and then EVT is the event that's automatically generated, and you call EVT dot prevent default. So that's an easy way to do it in compliant code. In non-compliant code, though, it's a little bit more difficult. So in Internet Explorer, especially older versions, they may not interpret this properly, so you have to actually just create an anonymous function that doesn't take a parameter, and then what you do is you grab window.event, so it's set as a property, then you set the event's return value to false. That's what this is doing, but it's doing it it's a little bit more work. So the browser compatible code, this is the version of the event handler that will take care of browser compliant and non-compliant code. When I say non-compliant, you should think to yourself, in other words, which is also the symbol for that would be IE. So IE. You've got Internet Explorer that's usually the outlier. So this is how it's done. It's actually very simple. EVT by default, if it's on the Firefox or Chrome or any of those compliant browsers, it will already have a value. So if it goes in here, it says if not EVT. In other words, if EVT is equal to null, if it's a null value, meaning it doesn't know what I'm talking about there because nothing was passed in, it'll set EVT to window event. Okay, but otherwise it'll skip over this code, and we have the event already. So for most browsers, you just say if event.preventDefault exists, meaning that is a method that exists, call it. Okay, if this returns false, meaning that doesn't exist or that's null, it doesn't know what we're talking about, it'll go to the else, which would mean we're in IE. So to say EVT equals return value, or return value equals false. So that kind of combines the last two sets of code and actually handles both of them. A lot of times, sometimes you can load smaller images as the events occur, but a lot of times the images might be kind of large. So a common technique is to preload the image. So in other words, you're downloading the image from the website. So how do we create an image object? You say var image equals, or whatever name you want to choose, equals new image. And then after you're done creating the empty image object, you preload it by saying image.src equals, and then set the location of the image name. That's going to preload it. Okay, so that's all it's doing. It's preloading it, so the next time it actually gets loaded, it'll load the cached version rather than having to go to the website. So this code actually preloads all the images referred to by href attributes of A. So first we say var links equals anything that has a tag name of A. And then we have three variables we're using here, the loop counter, link for single links just to keep the syntax clean, and then image, which is our image we're creating each time. The blank image, and then setting its source so we can preload it. So the first time through the loop, it'll say link equals link set I. That's just to shorten the name here. We could directly use link set I and forego the use of link, but that's this is just a clean way to make it look cleaner. So you say link equals links at I, image equals new image. That creates a blank image. And then this does the preloading. You just use the object image.src equals links href. So I think it's maybe in a couple pages, yeah. Yeah. So, oh, that's the image swap. Yeah. Well, this isn't quite what I was looking for, but it'll be very similar for this. The image swap application is pretty awesome. You've got the first link for accessibility. You've got it so that all these images beyond the first one is the first link, but the remainder of them are other images for the LI or list item element. Then you've got H2ID caption. So the caption for the first link is James Allison 11. So that's our title here. but that's the default caption because this is the one that's showing. And the image source is exactly what it is up here. But you might think, well, what are these list image items for? And those are for a list of thumbnail images that the user can click to change them. So here's LI. You've got padding right is 10, and then display is set to inline. So it's not, the list items will actually not be one right after the other vertically. They will actually be on the side. So if we go back here, you can see that they're right next to each other. Okay, rather than going this way, vertically across the page. And then they give you the JavaScript. You grab the image, the caption, and the image list. That's the UL, unordered list. And then you've got the caption. And then you've got the main image element. That's the big one right here. That's this guy. Then you set var image links equal to list node, which is our image list, dot get elements by tag name. So any anchor tag that lives inside of the list nodes, which is the UL element. So if we look back here, any anchor tags that lives inside of this guy named image list, so that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one, all of these are elements, and they are loaded into memory into this image link right here. And then we loop through them, and basically they're attaching event handlers to each one. If you do this, var link equals this will refer to the link node and the particular iteration through the loop. Okay, if you don't do this, you're going to end up attaching the link nodes to the same event handler for each one, so it's only going to end up being effectual for the last one. So this is actually crucial. You have to say var link equals this. That's how you tell it, I'm talking about this link node, not some other link node. Okay, so you have to say that. And then you say image node source for this particular image node equals link image dot get attribute href. So that's the source is the href if we look at the code. The source in here, href on the images right here. You've got images h2, images h3, images h4, images h5. So don't get that confused with this h1. These are just the names of the images. But that's what the href means. Okay, you also have things like title, which will go in the caption, which we can see in just a second. You've got caption node.firstchild.node value. So that's saying the caption should be set to whatever the particular title is when the user clicks on this particular node. Now notice, link node onClick, this loop is just attaching this function to the onClick of that particular link. Okay, it is not calling them for each of these. So you might think, well, that's really bizarre that we keep calling this function. Well, this function isn't getting called yet. The function is event driven. That means the user has to actually click it for it to actually get called. What we're doing in the loop is just attaching this whole thing to the particular link nodes, so the different images that are part of the list items. And then at the bottom, before the end of the loop, we preload the image. So image equals new image, and then you say image source is link nodes get attribute href. So that's going to pull the image into memory so it can be preloaded. And then for accessibility and usability, we put first link.focus. So let's actually take a look at that. You've got the, I think that was image swap. Yeah, image swap. So I'm going to run this guy right here. So we've got that, and you'll see that when I click on any particular one, what it does is it sets the href, or the source, after it's preloaded these images. It sets the source of that image to the big picture, and it also, you'll notice, it's changing the caption. Okay, so be aware that it's changing the caption. Well, how is it doing that? It's grabbing the title for the particular as the particular attribute for these anchor tags. When I click on these, it is actually loading the caption and the corresponding image as well. So this is looking very dynamic. This is a lot better than a plain old HTML application. Okay. This is now showing the timers. There's two different timers. There's one that's a one-time use timer, or what they call a one-time timer, and then there's an interval timer. So the one-time timer only happens once. So after 5 seconds, we hide the message still under construction. So all you do is you set the class attribute closed that sets display to none. So if after 5 seconds, this is this is already there when you first load the page, but after 5 seconds, it will go away. Two methods for working with the one-time timer. You've got setTimeout and clearTimeout. These are global. You pass it the name of a function and then the delay time. So what that does, like we have here, setTimeout, you have hide message and then 5,000 milliseconds. So that means after 5 seconds, because milliseconds a thousandth of a second, 5,000 of them equal 5 seconds, we call hide message after 5,000 milliseconds or 5 seconds has occurred. So this is the name of the function. You pass a function name to a function, which is kind of interesting. If you're familiar with C++, it's like function pointers, and if you're familiar with something like C#, it's like delegates a little bit. This is the name. You're treating the function name as an object, and you're passing it as a parameter to this setTimeout. If you look down here, hide message, which we're saying will occur after 5 seconds, is an anonymous function that sets the startup message attribute class to closed, and then you clear the timeout. This cancels the timer, so we don't have to have the timer continue to count. Okay, so it's done. They embed the timer function, the first parameter. We're going to see the interval one too. This will use both of them actually. This is one that uses an interval timer. So this one has a counter. This is just going to actually, it's going to call the function every second, okay, every 1,000 milliseconds, which we should see right there. Yep. So set interval, they're using an anonymous function in this case, so they're actually creating the function here, just calling it function, counter plus plus. Set increments the counter that's declared out here. They set timer there. Notice this occurs in window onload. This is not the same as up here. You have set timeout and clear timeout for the one-time use thing. Set interval and clear interval are for, they have the similar syntax, but it's an interval, not a one-time thing. What's going to happen is you've got interval time set here. That's going to call that function that's specified every however long you specify an interval. So interval here is 1,000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. So then it's going to call this function right here, which could have been defined separately and then passed as a parameter like this, but they decided to put it here. It's going to call this. It's going to increment counter, so the first time through it's going to take it from 0 to 1, and then it's going to set the node value of the counter's first child, which is its text. You set the counter's node value equal to this variable counter, so that'll be 1 the first time through, 2, 3, 4. It's a clock. That's basically what it is. So if we look at that over here, you will see the is it the fax timers? I think it is. Let's see here. Yeah. Alright, so if we run this, you'll see that it's still under construction. For 5, still under construction disappears. That was the one with the one-time timer. But you notice that number of seconds continues. This one keeps changing. So we can use the application just as we were before. We can continue to use the some other features, whatever we want to do. So it's very, very, very useful. So I can hit tab to loop through these and keep using them because of the accessibility we added to it. It's actually pretty nice. That right here is just our timer. It's changing the value here as before. The final thing they show is the slideshow app with the third image displayed. This is the third image. This is a frame, obviously. The slideshow is going to actually be, by default, we set the image list to not displaying because we're actually not, we don't want it to display as a list. We're just using it basically as a memory technique so that we can show it in this image source with the particular casting. You'll notice there's no thumbnails to be clicked on. It's just there. This list here is just there so that the JavaScript can go through and change the value of the particular image. So you've got here similar code to what we did before. Create an image in memory, get the href, and then they're pushing an image cache and then setting the item to the particular image cache after the timer has executed. So the timer is actually, if you know set interval, we have the function defined here. That's the first parameter. And then 2000 milliseconds, which means this thing's going to go off automatically every 2 seconds. So we have image counter equals image counter plus 1 modulus the image cache.length. You might think, well, what the heck is that? Well, the image counter is being used as an index for this array. This array image cache contains all the different images. So I believe there's 4 of them, for example. So if there's 4 images, that would be image cache.length. The reason they're doing modulus is they're making sure that this image counter never goes outside the boundaries of the number of images. It's always going to reset and start at 0 back again when it gets to the edge of the boundaries. So it's actually very, very clever the way they're doing it. So modulus does that. Modulus, if you don't recall, is the remainder operator. It does a division between whatever this number is and there, and then instead of returning the quotient, it returns the remainder. So when it gets to something like, if it's 5 mod 4, or 4 mod 4, we'll say, 4 mod 4 will actually return 0, because 4 divided by 4 is 1 with a remainder of 0. 5 mod 4, it'll never actually get to that because we're resetting image counter, but just as an example, if we have 5 mod 4, 5 mod 4 will return to a 1. Okay, so this is preventing it from going outside the bounds. That's the whole purpose. So then, these are exercises, so we're not going to modify those. You can do it yourself if you wish, but we're going to show the slideshow right here. You notice every 2 seconds, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. See, it goes to the second image, goes to the third image, goes to the fourth image, then goes back to, oh, actually, I'm sorry, fifth image, then goes back to the original image. Okay, so the length would be 5, not 4. So it's ensuring that the images you've got image 0, image 1, image 2, image 3, image 4, image, and then it goes, when it increases to 5, it does 5 mod 5 and then returns to 0. So that's why we start over on image 0. If it tried to go to image 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, those images don't exist. There's not enough items in that list to accommodate those. So doing what we call modular arithmetic actually makes sense. It's clock arithmetic. So if I tell you, for example, that it's 10 at night, what time will it be in 3 hours? You're going to tell me it's going to be 1. You're not going to tell me it's going to be 13, unless you're using military time, but I think you get the point. Even with military time, if it's 23 hours and you say add 2, it's going to be 1. Okay, so it does clock arithmetic. It goes over again. All right, so that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, please let me know. Please email me at jpbaugh@oaklandcc.edu, and check out the discussion board if you have any questions there. I'm sure your classmates would be excited to see what you have to say. All right, thank you and have a great day.